everybody. I'm excited to be back. I know I haven't seen you in a while, caught in the vortex of the pandemic, and you know all how that goes. But I was thinking this week, I wanted to come back and bring you an awesome video, but something really juicy and something really good and something that is impacting a lot of us. I know a lot of my videos I make for people who are newer doulas, and you have lots of questions and I want to have lots of answers, but also there are things that come up as we progress in our careers. And I think some of those are equally, if not more important than some of those early questions we have around like, hey, how do I coordinate due dates? There's a video on that, go check it out. So today I'm super excited to have with me Nick Heidbreder. Nick and I have been doula colleagues for forever, since we did a term on the DONA board together over a decade ago. And one of the things that I have spent a lot of time talking about in my career is vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is sort of that concept of, being traumatized by something we bear witness to. And of course, as doulas, we get to see wonderful, 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 amazing, beautiful things happen all the time. And sometimes we see things that are not so beautiful. And what do we do with that? And what I noticed in my career as it progressed is that around the 3-year mark for me, and I noticed that for a lot of other people around me, for nurses, midwives, childbirth educators, doulas around me, around that 3-year mark, people started feeling a little antsy and a little yucky because there's a cumulative effect to vicarious trauma. And unless you do something about it, what inevitably happens to a lot of people is they say, maybe I'm not meant for this job. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. It's not what I thought it was. And then it makes me sad to see wonderful doulas and midwives and nurses and childbirth educators leave the field because they think the option is live like this yucky feeling, yucky place, or leave. And it doesn't have to be like that. And so I'm excited to welcome Nick, who's been doing a real deep dive into this topic the last couple of years, and wants to help birth workers so that we can keep doing this important work. It has never been more critical for us to be doing this work than now. But how do we keep going when we're not feeling good? So, Nick, please introduce yourself and welcome to our show.
Thank you. I also just want to add on to that not only did Stephanie and I serve on the DONA International board together, but we were also always roommates during those years for board meetings, which was like being in high school, like a sleepover kind of thing again. So I love you and appreciate you for that. Yeah, and this, well, first I'll just say, so my name's Nicole Heidbreder. I usually go by Nick, which is why Stephanie's calling me that. I live and work in Washington, D.C. I am a birth doula trainer via DONA International, and I'm also actually an end-of-life doula trainer through an organization called INELDA, which is the International End-of-Life Doula Association. In addition to those roles within the doula world, I also work as a nurse. And over the past 10 years, I've worked as an ER nurse, also as a labor and delivery nurse, and also as a hospice nurse. And I really have to credit Stephanie, quite frankly, with a little bit of my own awareness of this topic. I believe it was back in 2009, maybe 2008, that Stephanie authored an article for the DONA International magazine. And I believe the title was The 3-Year Itch, right? Wasn't it, I think? And it for me, it was such an aha moment because essentially Stephanie had put words to something that I was feeling and I didn't really understand it. The way that I jokingly talk about it, and I just want to preface this is jokingly, but I was noticing in myself that sometimes as I was leaving the hospital, that there was a part of me that just wanted to like light a match and throw it behind me as I'm walking out, because I felt such frustration at various things that I was a witness to and was in some ways a part of through being a birth doula. And it was really challenging to deal with those emotions. And I really didn't know how to process them. I didn't know how to work through that. I didn't know how to move through it. So it kind of stayed as like stuck energy inside me. And then I ended up going to nursing school and then starting to work as a labor and delivery nurse and working alongside and becoming friends with and more intimately involved with other labor and delivery nurses, midwives, and OB doctors, residents, medical students. And then I really saw like, oh man, that that feeling of powerlessness and frustration and burnout from the system and from systemic structures, but also from horizontal frustration that goes on in the birth world. I really realized that so many other people in their own ways are also struggling with that sense of vicarious trauma and that sense of burnout. And one of the things that actually became incredibly clear to me when I was working as a nurse, um, which was really sad. I don't know, I feel a little bit emotional just sort of saying this, but I started noticing that there were some nurses and doctors specifically on my unit that really, instead of providing trauma informed care, they were actually providing sort of like trauma induced care from themselves, that they had experiences with patients, with clients that affected them so deeply and were traumatic to them, that then they were coming into birth rooms with this heightened nervous system, this heightened sense of potential death and heightened fear, really. And they weren't aware that then they were sort of like spreading that trauma into the other rooms that they went into. And I just really saw how sad I was for them and then also for the clients. And then I was able to kind of realize, oh goodness, maybe 10 years ago when I was a new doula and I was having those feelings of walking out of the hospital with a lot of frustration, I now was able to connect the dots and to see, wow, those people that I felt that about, like they were also people that were really struggling. And they were also people that didn't know how to deal with that sense of frustration and um, and how to process when you are working in a hospital. So you just, by virtue of numbers of patients and the variety of kind of patient situations that you have, you really don't get a lot of teaching and or support on how to deal with those things. And it really just made me realize, like, wow, in our maternity care system, we really need to help the people providing the care to find a way to process the trauma that we all experience in various forms while doing the work that we love. And that's the sort of like juxtaposition of it, is that I think most people don't go into birth work because they sort of feel like, well, I'll try this. Like, as that's not what people in birth work are doing. People come to birth work because we are birth junkies, and we know that birth is the crucible of something so fascinating and so beautiful and so ephemeral, and which is beautiful. So then we're working alongside people that feel this connection to it, but we're also working alongside people that have a lot of unprocessed trauma and a lot of unprocessed emotions
Yeah.
that accumulate.
Yeah, and I remember when I started to have some of those feelings, and then over time, I noticed that other people around me, I could almost pinpoint when I believe it's cyclical. It's a cyclical thing. You can move past it and you'll hit it again at some point. It's not like, you do the work one time and then you're good for the rest of your career, in this field. It's like it's a cyclical thing. And I noticed that I could tell how long someone had been working, based on how they were talking, how they spoke about certain things, how they reacted to things, how they told stories was really interesting. And as I developed, what was really sad to me too is that I had been in this field for many years before I had to research what I was feeling, and then found the word vicarious trauma, that wasn't even something that anyone in any interaction had ever talked about. It wasn't anything we talked about online. It wasn't anything we read about. It was just like this thing I had to seek out. And so when I was developing my own thoughts and theories around it, I've done this presentation at a couple of conferences as well. And I developed this thing I call the 3 A's, that getting through vicarious trauma with the 3 A's. And the first A is awareness. So it's like what you're talking about, awareness of what's going on. And I think awareness of why it happens is really useful too. And I know I had a bit of a turning point for myself in my career where I saw some midwives supporting a client having a home birth who had a previous cesarean. And the recommendation was that people labor in the hospital, but this person knew that if she went to the hospital, she wasn't going to have a successful VBAC. And so she was having her baby at home. And we get to the pushing, everything. I mean, her labor was super amazing and super smooth. And we get to the pushing and she's pushing for a long time. And we get to the 2-hour mark and I see the midwives looking at each other. And I know what that means. It means, they're going to have to recommend a transfer to the hospital. And then, we tried a few different things and the baby came out within a few pushes from that point forward. But as soon as that baby came out and went onto the parent's chest and the midwives went into the hallway out of sight of the parents, but where I was standing, I could see them. And I saw them hug each other and I heard one of them say, by the skin of our teeth. By the skin of our teeth, that we didn't have to go to the hospital because you know what? They weren't worried about that person's safety or health. She was perfect. The baby was perfect. They were worried about having to go into a hospital where the obstetricians there would be really unhappy that someone who had had a previous cesarean was laboring at home and was attempting a home birth. And I realized that what made that whole thing stressful for them was the idea of transferring. And I thought, gosh, that sure makes work hard. Think about vicarious trauma and all of the things that we have to deal with. And then we start to add in, like you said, these horizontal issues around our interprofessional relationships and those hospital policies and those dynamics. And that really adds to all of it. And I know as doulas, one of the things I have found particularly frustrating is where I go into a hospital and I say, hey, what if we tried this thing? And the nurse looks at me like, you're insane. Oh my God, we could never do that. And I'm like, well, I said it because the hospital 10 kilometers away, they do it, right? So it's as doulas, as we go into, I have 13 hospitals in a 1-hour radius for me that do labor and delivery. So I have done births at 13 hospitals. Well, when you can attend births at 13 hospitals, guess what? You see a lot of variation in policy and how frustrating it can become for a family in one hospital to be allowed all of these things and then to be denied them in another hospital. And I think that's an element that adds to the vicarious trauma doulas feel because we feel helpless, right? Mm-hmm. But okay, so awareness. So talk to us about awareness.
I agree with that a lot. I think awareness, also one of the things that that I learned through my working with my own therapist on my own post-traumatic growth is there's a phrase of like, you have to name it to tame it. That if you're able to name a feeling that you're having, that it actually then helps to have a little bit of cognitive dissonance so you can actually then tune into, okay, so this is the thing I'm feeling. I'm feeling rage. I'm feeling judgment. I'm feeling helpless, powerless. I'm feeling maybe even triggered. This person's reminding me of some other situation, that because those things usually go together. So then once you have an awareness that those are the emotions that you're feeling, then you have the ability to kind of dance with them and then to, think like, okay, well, where is this coming from? Is this from the situation? Is this my perception of the situation? Also getting into one of the things in my course, which we'll talk about shortly, but one of the things also is just kind of gauging into the nature of truth of like, so is my perception, is my feeling of this situation really true? Or is it just my perception? And can I become aware that there's also another perception and another truth because I'm in a human interaction. So of course there's always multiple truths, there's always multiple perspectives. But I think just beginning to have that awareness, as you said, of your own feelings, of the situation, of the objective and then the subjective situation really helps to then create a little bit of space for then developing and even knowing that you need tools to then help with those things. Because if you don't have the awareness of it, then you're just going to walk around as a ball of frustration, passive aggressive behavior, judgment, othering, you know,
and physical
also
manifestations for some people. And then it's like, then you can't sleep at night and you're having intrusive thoughts and
looping. Yep.
yeah. And, you know, or you just don't find enjoyment in the things that you used to love. You don't want to go out. Not that there's a lot of places to go out right now, but you know, you don't want to
That's
go
right.
out. You don't, you know, and it's like all of those behaviors, you know, and we can't, sometimes we don't pinpoint, I'm feeling this way because of my work, like because of my doula
Yes.
work, because we still want
Yes.
to do the work and we still love the work, but we haven't connected that what's happening in our life is because of this vicarious trauma. So that brings us to the second A, which is acceptance, you know? So I think we have that awareness, and then you were just talking about it, and it's kind of like, okay, there's a thing, and now I got to do something about it, right? This point where we accept that this is, you know, we accept that this is what is, to get us to the third A, which is action. And, you know, one of the reasons I wanted to have Nick on is because I feel like we don't talk about this topic enough. I want to talk a little bit about it here today, but Nick has a course for birth workers coming up. And so those of you that are really resonating with this content and you're thinking, I want to keep doing this work, but I'm feeling like I can't. If you are saying to yourself, I want to keep doing this work, but I feel like I can't go on, the answer is not to quit. Well, maybe the answer is to quit. I can't tell you what your answer is. But before you do that, please take some time to dig into this a little bit deeper. And maybe Nick's course, you know, would help you with that. I think there's something special about birth workers that, you know, it's nice to take a course that's tailored to birth workers instead of a course on vicarious trauma tailored to psychologists, which is very common. Actually, the term was first coined, you know, for people who were psychologists that dealt a lot in sexual assault and sexual abuse therapy, right? And that they had to listen to traumatic material regularly and respond in a constrained manner. And I just want to say that that's something that's unique. When you have to see traumatic, when your best friend goes through something tough and you get to like have emotion with your friend. Yeah, that sucks. That's horrible. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. That is a normal response, right? When someone is telling you or something is happening in front of you and you have to respond in a constrained manner, that's actually vigorous neurological activity happening in your brain, which when we're not learning how to cope with that and deal with that properly can actually cause long-term consequences to our brain.
Yes.
And so that's why this is so important.
Yes. It's I love that you're talking about that. And this is one of the elements of the course that I teach. It's called Resiliency for Birth Workers, an embodied journey through our passion and our judgment. And we'll make sure to put a link to the course in the comment section of the video or something like that. But that exactly, Stephanie, as you just said, that's one of the really, really important things to understand, that really any birth worker, physician, nurse, midwife, doula, are all basically doing what we call controlled empathy. So it means that we are in a room where intense situations are happening, sometimes truly life and death, or sometimes just perceived life and death. I think we all have experienced the spectrum in between those two. And yet having to remain calm, having to remain effective, having to remain in our role as a professional, and to not, and to sort of stifle and to not fully embody and exhibit the human emotions that it, of course, is normal that any of us feel. And I really feel that I guess what, you know, one of the things that I want to stress in my course, and one of the things I'm really trying to emphasize with this work, is that I think that all of us, as, and also because perhaps doulas are watching this more than any other role, but just to have some softness in your heart and to recognize that physicians are also going through that, midwives are also going through that, nurses are also going through that, And for those people who work, sometimes 5 days a week, 3, 4 days a week, day in, day out, that they're doing that literally every single day that they're at work. Whereas perhaps as a doula, if you're maybe attending quote unquote only, even though I know it's a lot, but like 3 to 5 births a month. So you're doing that 3 to 5 times a month, and then think how taxing that is on your emotional state. And then recognize that there are some physicians and midwives and nurses that are doing that multiple times in a week, and then trying to go home and live their quote unquote, like trying to integrate into their life with other people.
Yeah.
And I emphasize that because I really, I have become such a believer that there's so much judgment in the birth world, and that's adding on to the vicarious trauma that many of us feel in many different roles. We see that infighting amongst doulas from different organizations. We see the infighting amongst doulas and midwives, doulas and nurses, midwives and nurses in some hospital settings. Like I know there was friction in my hospital amongst those roles, and then midwives and doctors and doulas. Like there's so much going on where we other and judge each other, and that adds on to the taxing nature of having these emotions in these moments, that the controlled empathy that Stephanie and I are talking about, and not really even being able to process it as humans normally would in the room with the people we're there with. So that's also creating these strange dynamics, strange power dynamics, and just and the thing is that it's not helpful for any of us. And ultimately, what we're all gonna, this is my own belief, is that the maternal health care system in most countries could use some help. I mean, I know this more so in America, but I know that in other countries in the past 20 years, there's been some not particularly great trends that are going on. Maybe not as egregious as the American system, but still somewhat negative. But the truth that I'm really clear on is that it has to be a collective liberation, or it's not really going to work. So as doulas, we have to cultivate compassion for the other people in the room, for the nurses, for the midwives, and the physicians. For the midwives, they have to also cultivate compassion for the other people in the room. Also for doctors, like it has to be. It can't just be any one of us saying, well, I'm gonna do something and I'm hoping that it helps other doulas not feel vicarious trauma. Ultimately, that's not going to work, because we have to take everybody with us, because we have to recognize that this vicarious trauma is affecting each role.
Yeah, it's true. You said something that triggered a thought for me. Around compassion and understanding the other roles in the room. It's interesting because one of the things I've done most of my doula career, maybe not the very beginning, I don't know, I don't remember that far back, it was so long ago. But I actually, I kind of acknowledge the hierarchy of the room. One of the things as a doula is I find that because I want to get buy-in, and I want to feel like it's a collaborative approach, is I'll ask permission for things that I don't really need to ask permission for, but I think it's nice, and I feel like I can do the ego check where I'm like, okay, I don't need to ask permission to put a hot pack on this person, but what if I just came back in the room and said like, hey, Nurse Shelley, do you want to just test the heat of this hot pack before I put it on Susan's back? I just feel like, why not do more things like that? Hey, nurse, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Like, I just feel like that buy-in has really changed the dynamic that I experience with the nurses.
Well, because it creates a collaborative environment. It's essentially then when you do that, you're stepping into actually a leadership role in that room, where you are the one that is creating collaboration, and you're also creating openness, where you're trying to say, let's do this together. That's my hope and my intention. And in that way, also, when you set that as the standard, that is where your leadership as a doula comes in, because ultimately then that nurse can rise to that occasion and meet you and be like, yeah, let's, like, thank you for asking. I think this. And then you can say, oh, that's great. That's a great idea. Let's do this. I'm sorry. I don't know if you can hear that, but there's a helicopter. Oh, you can. Oh, good. Okay. I'm in DC.
The wonder of Zoom. the
Yeah,
Zoom.
yeah,
It
yeah. Okay.
focuses in on the sound.
Okay, good, good.
Okay, so the third A is action, right? So I know we could talk about this for 3 days, but let's give people a few tips of things that maybe would help. And one of the things that you talked about was you mentioned that we can't process usually with the people that are in the room. And I think that leads us to another important point, which is processing. So, we talk in doula training, we talk about people processing the birth with their client, but sometimes doulas, a lot of times doulas need processing. And so how do you do that? And you need to have, this is for me, I just feel like my doula community and my doula, sisterhood, I know that's a sort of feminine term, but that has been really, really important for my growth, is to be able to talk to someone, and I run an agency. And so we have a very collaborative type of environment, and we have lots of people to talk to. But if you're a doula out there who's just starting out, or you don't have a doula in your community that you're close with yet, like, please find some. Please find some, because you need to be able to process your tough birth experiences with someone else.
And in particular, I actually feel like you need to find another birth worker to do that, because there really is such nuance to our work that other people in other jobs are just not really going to get the nuance, why this matters, why that doesn't matter, and they're not really going to understand that. That was something that I learned big time, especially with my here in Washington, D.C. I have quite a lot of friends that work for the World Bank. So they're doing advocacy and activism work in their own ways. Most of them are more environmentally focused. But they really don't understand what a birth is like, and what a birth room is like, and what it can be like in moments with very, very heightened energy, and how that makes you feel when you're walking away from it. So yes, one of the action items of dealing and processing with vicarious trauma is having trusted companions that you can process with. Sometimes that is simply just doing like auditory processing, where you literally kind of just like, I call Stephanie and then I verbally dump on her. I ask permission. Steffi, can I verbally dump on you and rage and emote and express all of my frustration. And then in an ideal world, Stephanie has her own professionalism enough to say like, okay, are you finished with that? Are you open to any feedback? And let's talk about that situation. What could you have done differently? What would you have hoped have happened? What can you learn from this? What will you now research and look up that will then help you in the next experience when you do this? What potential other skill sets might you need? In the course that I'm teaching, the resiliency for birth workers, one of the things that we dive into pretty deeply is nonviolent communication for heightened situations. So one of the course contents is on, in those moments when it's second stage and potentially some intervention is going on, babies +2 station, maybe +1, and there's a lot of energy in the room in those moments. How do we, as doulas, as nurses, as midwives, as physicians, be able to communicate, speak our truth, but do it in a way that doesn't instigate more kind of angry energy in the room, which ultimately isn't going to help us. It's not going to help other people, and it's also not going to help the birthing person. So I think that's a skill set that we all need to learn. But that would just be an example that I would offer as, when we get into what are the actions, that some of it is learning additional skill sets that then we bring into the birth work.
Yeah, the more time we spend as a doula, I really think it makes us better humans.
Yes.
I've had partners before that will say things like, stop talking to me like a doula client, okay? Because I'm being calm and I'm trying, and then I cut my finger really badly last week. And so I cut my finger and it looked pretty bad. And there was like a lot of blood. And then I just sat down on the ground and I was just like gathering my thoughts before I decide, like, I need to look at this again. And what am I going to do? And my partner came up the stairs and I just looked at him and said, I cut my finger, like kind of a lot. And he just looks at me and he's like, I just love how calm you are, even in difficult situations, you know? Well, like running around the house with like blood everywhere is not going to help my situation, right? So, yeah, but those are skills that are developed. And again, for any of you newer doulas that are there and you're thinking like, but I'm like an extroverted kind of, yeah, me, I'm Portuguese and French Canadian. Like it doesn't get too much more extroverted than that. But those are skills that we can develop and learn. How do I bring that in and like channel all of that juicy energy so that I can respond in a way that's going to be effective, right? For, again, for everyone, right? For us, for our clients, for everyone. So, okay, so communication and working on our communication is one of the things. One of the other things that I often talk about is making sure that we're fitting in time for our self-care. And making a really big list of what self-care means to us, because, you know, yeah, I know self-care doesn't just mean getting a mani-pedi, right? Although it might for you, right? Self-care, we got to have lots of things that we can do, because sometimes some things are harder than others, you know? You can't always go into the forest, do some forest bathing, right? But sometimes you can. And so maybe that's on the list. And then maybe the mani-pedi is on the list. Maybe getting the massage is on the list. And if we can, you know, and if after those difficult births, if we can make time to have a few hours to by ourselves, if we make sure that we're fitting in that time to sleep, which is critical to our mental health well-being, good sleep, right? What are the other things that we need to do around our nutrition and exercise and all of those things that are feeding our body, mind, soul, you know, to be able to continue this important work?
100%. Yeah, that's in my digital course, the way that I refer to that, I really kind of, in some ways, almost want to do away with the word self-care
Yeah, I know.
a little bit, because
Yeah.
the way it's kind of been utilized. So the way that I refer to it is self-regulation activities really have to be a part of someone's daily, weekly, monthly life. I think that just as a human being, for any human, but in particular for birth workers, because the nature of our work is so intense. It's so intense good, and it can be so intense bad.
Yeah.
That the nature of that intensity calls upon us to know ways in which that we individually need to be self-regulated. So so that's one of the aspects of the course. And my course, the way I talk about it is that we have to be building our resiliency bank account, and
Yes.
and and depositing into it on a weekly, daily basis, such that then when you do have one of those long inductions or one of those near death experiences at a birth that you might be at, or even a fetal demise or something like that, or the laboring person that ends up intubated in the ICU, you know, whatever it is, that of course that's going to be taxing on you. So that there isn't an expectation that then you just are like, oh, no big deal, like another day at the office.
Yeah.
No, that wouldn't be an appropriate emotional human reaction to that. But the idea being is that if we begin to investigate and then know what are our own self-regulation needs and activities that are most helpful to us, and we engage in those and make a commitment to engage in those, then when those more traumatic births happen, that we actually have some, we actually, like, we don't crash down
Yeah.
as deeply as we might have if we didn't have that stuff. I don't know if there's a more elegant way. I wanted to say something else and then the word kind of escaped my mind. But I think that stuff is really, really important. And honestly, for me anymore, I've been a birth worker for about 16 years. And at some point along the way, I just really learned for myself that I wanted to stop taking classes and stop taking workshops on how to learn things that I would
Yes.
do for my clients. So like, you know, for example, like spinning babies. I love spinning babies. It's been really helpful. It was, you know, like I think it's it's a wonderful, beautiful body of knowledge that Gail has taken from other people and then massaged into a message that comes clearly from her heart. So I really appreciate that. But what became true to me was that knowing spinning babies was not going to help me want to like that was not going to help me with the 3-year itch. It wasn't going to help me with the vicarious trauma. That actually, in order to stay sustained in birth work, whether as a nurse or as a doula, that I really had to learn how to take specific better care of myself to facilitate continuing on in this industry. And I really think that every person has to find out what's unique to them, because I love that you just mentioned being an extroverted person, and I think you and I have talked about this. Like, I'm very much an introverted person, that being around people is very, very depleting for me. I need alone time and bath time and time with animals, and I'm a very sensitive person, and I like, my emotions really get to me, and it's very easy for me to be very overwhelmed by my own emotions. And so the kind of self-regulation activities for me are going to be different than what is self-regulation for you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. A lot of times newer doulas are like, what course should I take next? This, learn about this, learn about this. Yes. Okay. So we are running out of time. So tell us of like the topic list of the course, how it runs, what the structure is, any info that you can share about that.
Yeah, with pleasure. So the course is called Resiliency for Birth Workers: An Embodied Journey Through Our Passion and Judgment. It's a 5-week course. We start on April 5th. And basically, so it's 5 weeks. Each week, there are maybe 3 or 4 short videos with handouts that are in a portal that people have access to. And then we'll have a weekly sort of group coaching call on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, where people can come and share and get individual coaching from me, also collective intelligence sharing and wisdom sharing from the people that are taking the course together. So that kind of helps us have a cohort of people that are also processing and trying to figure this stuff out. Because what's true is that feeling this frustration and this burnout is not unique to anybody. Most people feel it in some capacity. So 5 weeks, there's course content that people can digest on their own time. They'll have lifetime access to that. And then weekly mentorship calls. There's also a private closed Facebook group where we can also be sharing during the week, people sharing, asking questions and whatnot. And there's some guest lectures that I'm really excited about. So a couple of my mentors, Penny Simkin, Deborah Pascali Bonaro, Ibu Robin Lims, a beautiful, she's who I attended my first birth with back in Sumatra many, many, many years ago. My friend Eze, who's an amazing Qigong teacher. My friend Joanne Wolf, who's a doctor of physical therapy.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, my friend Esther Nicholson, who is just an incredible coach therapist who leads us through EFT, tapping specifically for birth workers. So how we can process emotions after a birth. So there's a recorded tapping session in there that's specific for us as birth workers. So there's all that. There's handouts that have questions and prompts and journal prompts, but also suggestions of things like things that I have found helpful. And so they might be helpful for somebody else. People can buy now. Again, we'll have the link for it on wherever this video is shown. Yeah, okay, down below. I am also someone that I am a nursing CEU provider. So if people register for this course, if you are a nurse, or if you are certified through an organization that will honor nursing contact hours, I'm also providing nursing contact hours. I'm hoping that incentivizes more healthcare providers to register and sign up.
Yeah.
Because I just really believe like this is not just doula work. This is nurse, midwife, physician, medical student. This is all of our work, and that we it would benefit us if we do this collectively.
Thank
I
you.
think
Thank you
that's it.
so much.
Yeah,
Thanks
yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
being here and sharing some of your tidbits and wisdom. And I can't wait to. I'm going to totally do this course. I can't wait to do it and
Thank
learn
you.
more. So thanks for
Thank you,
being here.
thank you, thank you. I love you and thank you. And thanks for the people that listen. I really appreciate it.